Hello from a sunny Vienna, and welcome to another Toll Tickets Tolling in Europe presentation. So this week we're going to take a closer look at the size of the light vehicle tolling market from both a revenue and subscription perspective. Before I start, I just want to preface by saying that all of the figures used in this presentation are Toll Tickets internal estimates, largely based on publicly available data. I will be speaking mostly in approximate terms rather than giving precise figures for each country. I will also be referring to data from the full calendar year 2019. This is because complete figures for the year 2020 are not yet available for all countries. 2019 was, of course, also the last normal year, if indeed normal means anything anymore. So let's get stuck in. So let's start with a look at collected revenues. So for the year 2019, over 19 billion euros was collected across the 21 European countries that we're looking at here. And of course, this is just for light vehicles again. If we were to include the likes of Turkey and Russia, which I have not included in this calculation, that would add roughly another 500 million euros to that total, just to give you an idea. But looking at the 19 billion light vehicle tolls collected that we have here, you can see that more than 60%, almost 12 billion euros, is generated by tolls paid in just France and Italy. These two markets are by far the largest and therefore the most important in Europe. The size of these figures is due largely to the size of their toll networks, so roughly 9,000 kilometers in France and just over 6,000 kilometers in Italy. It's also due to the fact that the tolls are charged according to sections and to a certain extent distance that is driven each and every time you drive across the network. So different to the fixed time-based vignettes that you have in other countries, which typically leads to lower revenues because you just pay once, regardless of how many times you drive across the road. So far behind these markets, we have the next three: Spain, Norway, and Portugal, all of roughly the same size, not exactly, of course, but all either side of the 1 billion euro mark. And again, they have the same kind of section-based tolls rather than vignettes, and typically applied across highways and major roads in the country. And then to complete the picture, we have the remaining 16 countries, which consists of a mixture of vignette schemes and other countries using an onboard unit and similar highway section-based tolls to the likes of France and Italy, but across far smaller networks and therefore addressing far fewer users. Perhaps some of the more overlooked countries in this list include the likes of the UK with its mixture of bridges and congestion schemes in London, and Croatia, which again a relatively small market compared to others, but Croatia has seen a massive growth in revenues over the past few years due to a significant rise in holiday makers driving there, particularly during the summer months. And of course, you can see that the way these countries split between onboard units and the use of vignettes, which we also explored in a lot more detail in a previous presentation that is also available via our YouTube channel, or you can also find it on LinkedIn or elsewhere. So here, what I wanted to do is, rather than looking at revenues, is look at the number of individual toll users with a subscription account across countries using either an onboard unit or a video-based toll. So in most cases, we count the number of individual subscribers based on the number of active onboard units rather than the number of accounts, because Of course, what you do have is a number of, say, fleet accounts, where one account will cover many vehicles. So what we try and do is look at the absolute number of vehicles to give a size of the market in this case. And to be clear, we've not included countries using vignettes, such as Switzerland or Austria, for example, because you typically wouldn't have an account or a subscription to purchase, say, an annual vignette. So unsurprisingly, we can see that France and Italy still have by far the largest number of users. Both countries have roughly 10 million onboard units in circulation. However, if we can see that countries like Spain and Portugal and the UK have a much higher share of users compared to their share of revenues. There are a number of factors behind this, which can include strong service offerings from either domestic service providers or a mix of domestic and foreign service providers. But most importantly, in some cases, it's because there are fewer manual payment options. So Portugal, for example, has removed a number of manual payment booths across some stretches of its tolled highway network, and indeed some parts of that tolled network have no manual payment options at all. It's entirely free flow, or MLFF, which is a term we explored in our last presentation about terminology. In those cases, of course, having an account, having an onboard unit or a subscription becomes much more necessary. If we think even the bigger countries like France, Italy, Greece, Spain, Croatia, and Serbia, all of those have no barrier-free tolling at all. So in all cases across France and Italy, for example, there is always a manual payment alternative. This is changing, and we will look at that in a future presentation, but this also has an impact on the choice of service. What remains true across countries today is that even though competition does exist, the vast majority of accounts are typically held by concessionaires rather than independent toll or mobility service providers. And of course, this has various consequences on how tolling is packaged to the end user, and therefore how popular or how pervasive a tolling service or a tolling subscription is. So if we look at the number of tolling subscriptions across each country against the total addressable market, and here we've defined the total addressable market as the total number of light vehicles traveling within that country, we can see that there's still plenty of opportunities for growth and to acquire new customers. Even in again, markets like France and Italy, we have more than 10 million onboard units in circulation. This is not more than 30% of what you can define as the total addressable market. So theoretically, you still have 70% of addressable light vehicles that don't have any kind of onboard unit or subscription. And at toll tickets, it's our belief, of course, that when you combine a strong mobility service offering with a toll service offering, this is where the scope to increase this share, or increase the pervasiveness of toll services combined with other mobility services exists. So this is one of the ways we think that we can capture this additional market and really boost those adoption rates. Some countries, of course, here, for example, Norway and Portugal do have a much higher penetration amongst light vehicles. Again, there are several reasons for this, but those two countries in particular, Portugal, as I mentioned, has already removed a number of manual payment options or a number of payment booths across its toll network. Norway is entirely free flow across its entire toll network. So in Norway, it's not strictly necessary to have an account with an onboard unit, but if you are a resident in Norway using the toll roads, then you are more than likely to have an account. So we haven't had a map yet in this presentation, and as you may have noticed by now, if you've watched previous presentations, we like maps. What I wanted to show here is, having spoken about the scale and relative success, should we say, of tolling service providers in different countries, here I wanted to provide an overview of which countries are open to independent service providers and those that are not. And just to be clear what we mean by independent, independent is a service provider that does not have a direct link to either the national tolling authority or one of the concessionaires. As you can see from this map, most of the large markets are open to a certain extent to independent toll service providers. However, even if they are technically open, all service providers must complete what are almost universally very lengthy and complex certification processes. So some countries in particular, you could actually even describe these processes as a barrier to entry, as the reality is that it's not always possible to complete the certification without the assistance of a domestic player. And some countries it's more complex than others, but even though they are technically open, it's not always possible or easy to provide services in that country. And as we can see, there are still a number of countries that do not allow or do not provide for independent service providers. But the reasons for this vary quite considerably. I mean, in some cases, tolls are defined as a tax and therefore cannot legally be collected by private entities. The congestion charges in Stockholm and Gothenburg are two good examples of this. Both are taxes, and so according to Swedish law could not be collected by anybody but the tax authority. In some countries, even if they are not technically open to independent service providers, there can still be quite a lively and a quite competitive domestic environment for toll services. So it may not be deemed necessary to put in place certification processes to allow additional parties to enter. And of course, in some cases, the reason can simply be because there's a lack of either market or consumer demand. As we've seen, some countries are extremely small when it comes to the addressable market and the addressable revenues, and there may just not be a demand from either consumers or providers to launch services in that market. It may not be commercially viable. So always something to bear in mind. And that's it today. So thank you for listening. That was a quick run through of what you might say the commercial opportunity in each country. If you do have any questions or comments, as always, please get in touch. We will have future presentations, as you can see. If anyone has any particular suggestions or requests, then again also get in touch, and we can look at covering those as well.